I do that every time. Thank you so much. So good to have everyone. Thank you for joining us in our session. If we could, I'll sort of go around the room according to the order I have on my screen. If you could just introduce yourself in terms of your affiliation. If you're a student, what college? If you were what college and what's your major? If you're a teacher, what's your school? If you're a K-12 educator, what's your school and what you teach? And then if you're a professor, where are you and what's your area? So we'll start with Rihanna, please.
Hi, I'm a senior at Morehead State University, and my major is secondary education and social studies.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Welcome. Maddie, can you give where you're from and everything?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a deeper learning resource teacher in Jefferson County Public Schools.
Okay.
I work with all teachers and all contents, but social studies is my jam.
Oh yeah, awesome. You're in the right place. You're among social studies nerds, I'm sure. Is it Miss Aspers? Am I getting it right? I see the initial.
Sorry, Nadine Casper. It keeps repeating that. I'm in Jefferson County. I teach 6th grade social studies this year. I've been in 8th grade for a long time before that.
Okay. Yes, that is a little bit of a difference from 8th to 6th grade. Yeah, that's a transition. Dr. Sharp, is it? Kim Sharp?
Yes. Hello, I'm Dr. Kimberly Sharp, and I teach elementary and middle grade social studies. I'm professor of education at Morehead State University.
Awesome, thank you. It seems like we've written some stuff together. We're in the same book somewhere. Like,
social studies teaching and learning.
Yes, awesome, thank you. Karina.
I am a senior at Morehead State University, and I'm a social studies and an ELA.
All right, good combination. Thank you. Thank you. Natalie.
Hi, I am also a student at Morehead State University. I am a senior secondary ed for social studies major. Okay,
thank you. Christy.
I'm also a student at Morehead State University studying in middle education.
All right, thank you. Mandy. Are you there, Mandy?
Yes, I'm from Morehead as well.
All right, thank you so much. You social studies major?
Yeah.
Awesome, good. All right, Tressa.
Hi, I work for the Kentucky Heritage Council. I coordinate the Native American and African American Heritage Commissions, as well as the Martin Luther King Commission.
Wow, you know, let's talk. I already see that we have a lot of common interests. I like what you just said. And I like just having everybody here. We have a number of students because you're one of the primary folks that this is all about. And so, okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. And what happened to my camera there? Oh boy.
You've disappeared. We're getting a shot of that beautiful kitchen.
Yeah, that's so weird. That was so weird. Oh, I know what happened. Okay. Yeah, all right, let's do it. In the interest of time, I'm Dr. Childs. I'm at NKU. My area is, I'm associate professor of social studies education and history. I'm a historian, and I'm affiliate of the history department and Black studies. Let me just jump right in because I do have a lot of information and resources. Learning from history, pandemics are nothing new in Native communities. So in a way of introduction, a way of intro, let me navigate this here. Yes. A sad reminder of discrimination and disease. Recently, the federal government revoked the reservation status for the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe's land. I think they've made some headway since then, but an article from March 27th, 2020, the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs informed the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe that its 321-acre Cape Cod reservation will be disestablished. Land taken out of federal trust, according to tribal chairman Cedric Cromwell. The Wampanoag traced their roots back to the Native Americans that shared a fall harvest meal with the Pilgrims in 1621, an event that is part of the history of our modern Thanksgiving celebrations. The Mashpee Wampanoag's loss of reservation status is indicative of the historic plight of the Native American tribes in the United States. Now, as I said, I think they've made some headway in terms of getting that revoked, but it's been a fight. Native American history has been chock full of discrimination, persecution, and disease wrought by Europeans. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused many to reflect upon the nature of pandemics in the world. If there is one group that understands widespread disease that decimated entire communities and even generations, it is Native Americans. However, Native American history is often downplayed. In this article, we will offer a brief discussion of pandemics in Native American communities to pay tribute and honor to the historic struggles Native American people have had with widespread disease. In the conclusion of this article, we'll offer a number of resources and lesson plans about the impact of widespread disease on Native communities. I'm going to give you a lot of takeaways. One of my research roles is I write for our local NPR station. We have a project called Democracy and Me. And I do weekly columns on civics and American history. And I've done a series on Native Americans, discrimination, pandemics, historical analysis of Thanksgiving. I'll be showing you those resources towards the end, and they're good takeaways. And we write it for teachers and to also educate the public. But I'm going to offer you, this is primarily going to be some historical analysis today. COVID-19 and First Nations. Navajo nations have been hit especially hard by the pandemic. A recent Newsweek, that's weird. I'm posting in and out. A recent Newsweek article from May 11, 2020 stated that the novel coronavirus has killed 100 of more than 3,100 confirmed patients in the Navajo Nation, a Native American territory that spans 27,000 square miles across the states of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. A Native American territory that's different from, it's a sovereign nation within a nation. That's the interesting thing about Native lands. They're sovereign nations within the nation. So for example, you take the reservations that are in Utah. Utah has no jurisdiction over those reservations. And I think a lot of our youth and students don't realize that. There's an aspect of American history that has been completely omitted from our textbooks. And we talk about Native Americans as a monolith. And so I have been spending a lot of time in the last probably 2 years just trying to tell that story. And I have some Native American ancestry, but I've always primarily identified as an African American, of course. But I've always heard stories about my grandparents and our Cherokee heritage. And so I've always been interested in trying to reclaim that. And I encourage other Americans to do the same thing and explore that history. But in terms of COVID-19, that number 100 out of, and this is back in May, so it's much higher now, but 100 out of the 3,100 confirmed patients. This is a very high number in relation to the Navajo population. In fact, The Guardian reported that the Navajo territory has the highest per capita infection rate in the US after New York and New Jersey, two of the worst hit states when COVID first began to take shape and to really be insidious back in May. What makes this even more tragic is that the Navajo Nation does not have the same resources as a place like New York or New Jersey to combat the virus. Native Americans continue to get the short end of the stick and were recently overlooked in terms of funding distribution. But thanks to a lawsuit filed against the federal government, the Navajo was granted $600 million in federal funding to combat the virus. Now, a little bit of history here. In pre-Columbian America, the diseases, so historical analysis, In pre-Columbian America, diseases were not widespread. So in other words, historians talk about pre-Columbian. Before the advent of Columbus, Christopher Columbus, and other Europeans, diseases were not widespread. Most of the major diseases that have caused pandemics in the Americas originated in the Old World. That is Europe, because Native Americans had very limited contact with groups outside of North and South America. The development and spread of deadly diseases was limited. With the arrival of Europeans in the Americas, diseases from the Old World devastated entire tribes. Native Americans were not previously exposed to most of the diseases brought to the continent by the European colonists. They had not built immunities to these bacteria and viruses. In addition, Europe served as a crossroads between many different peoples. Through constant warfare that spread afflictions throughout the continent, and the Silk Road bringing diseases from the East, Europeans developed an immunity to a large variety of diseases. Therefore, the diseases Europeans brought to the Americas decimated native populations, but had little effect on Europeans. This phenomenon is called the virgin soil effect. Natives were afflicted with many diseases brought to the Americas, including smallpox, bubonic plague, chickenpox, cholera, common cold, diphtheria, influenza, malaria, measles, scarlet fever, some sexually transmitted diseases, typhoid, typhus, tuberculosis, etc., and so forth. These brought unspeakable destruction to natives in the form of disability, illness, and extensive deaths. Like the COVID-19 in modern times, many of the Europeans were asymptomatic and thus did not even realize they were carrying or spreading the diseases. There's at least one case of the British intentionally exposing Native Americans to disease. In the Ohio country, they intentionally gave blankets to natives as gifts that had come from their smallpox infirmary. This is said to be the first instance of biological warfare. Widespread disease among Native Americans throughout history. As noted, much of Native American history has been plagued by widespread disease. The Plains Indians were ravaged by disease in the 19th century. Between 1837 and 1870, at least 4 different epidemics struck the tribes in the plains. It was such an issue that the Plains Indians began to avoid the white man when they learned that they were the source of the diseases. However, Europeans have valuable goods and resources that Indians relied on, such as metal pots, skillets, and knives. Thus, the allure of trade was too great. They traded with the Europeans eventually and spread diseases throughout their villages. So certain Native American cultural practices lent itself to the spread of disease. Unfortunately, Native culture and their way of life contributed to the rapid spread of disease in their communities. For example, they placed much emphasis on visitation of their sick, which led to the rapid spread of disease through continual contact. Native religious cultural practices also increased their exposure to these diseases. Many believed that diseases were caused by magic and sorcery, that if the body was not protected properly by the spirits, they were susceptible to diseases. This increased their exposure to these diseases. They often called on religious practitioners, known as shamans, to cure them of illnesses, a practice that involved continual close human contact. Of course, these beliefs only allowed the diseases to proliferate. The introduction of, depopulation. Well, this is a chart here. So this particular chart is from, this is South America. A lot of times when we study, I wanted to just, a side note, when we study Native American history, when we talk about Native American history, we think about primarily North America, but there were many indigenous populations in South America as well. So this particular chart looks at Mexico, or modern, what would be modern day Mexico, 1518 to 1593. You can see from 1518, see the population in millions here, how it just dips, like decimated by disease. So that gives you a visual. The introduction of old world diseases brought great depopulation to many Native tribes. On average, many Native Americans lost 25 to 50% of their tribe to illness. Disease affected smaller tribes in a greater way, as epidemics often brought certain tribes to the brink of extinction. For example, the Native population before the arrival of Cortés' invasion was estimated to be between 25 to 30 million in Mexico. So before the invasion of Cortés, think about that number, 25 to 30 million. However, half a century later, the population was reduced to just 3 million, largely due to infectious diseases brought by the Spanish. In 1520, there were 700,000 Native Americans in Florida. However, by 1700, the number was reduced to 2,000 because of widespread disease. The most devastating disease brought from the old world by Europeans was smallpox. Smallpox was lethal to many Native Americans, bringing sweeping epidemics and affecting the same tribes repeatedly. The first well-documented smallpox epidemic happened in 1518. The Lakota Indians called the disease the running face sickness. A small epidemic struck the Huron natives in 1639 in the St. Lawrence and Great Lakes region through traders from Quebec. Disease cut the Huron populations in half, going from 18,000 people in 1634 to nearly 9,000 just about 5 years later. In the 1770s, the smallpox wiped out an estimated 30% of the West Coast Native Americans. A decade later, in the 1880s, the same disease devastated the Plains Indians. As a result, the federal government of the United States established a smallpox vaccination program in 1832 for Native Americans. In their 1839 report, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs discussed the casualties of the 1837 Great Plains smallpox epidemic. They stated that no attempt, quote, no attempt has been made to count the victims, nor is it possible to reckon them in any of these tribes with accuracy. It is believed that if the number 17,200 from the upper Missouri River Indians was doubled, the aggregate would not be too large for those who have fallen east of the Rocky Mountains. The devastation from disease and depopulation devastated Native American communities in many ways. The division of labor and interdependence that was indicative of Native culture was greatly impacted by the epidemics. Fewer people were available to hunt, plant crops, or support their community in other ways. Loss of cultural knowledge transfer also impacted the population. Today, although Native Americans have developed the same immunity as their non-Native counterparts, some modern diseases affect Native Americans at a much higher rate than other Americans. American Indians and Alaskan Natives die at a greater rate from chronic liver disease and cirrhosis, diabetes, and chronic lower respiratory diseases. These discrepancies in disease patterns vary significantly between diseases, but have a significant impact on Native populations. Today, there is a mounting concern about the mourning effects of the coronavirus on Native populations that's often ignored. There is a sort of racial pecking order in the United States that if disease and epidemics and tragedies impact Black and brown folks and Native folks, it's not as important as those as European American descent. That's just how it plays out. More resources, you can look at the statistics, more resources are devoted for folks of light skin than they are in Black communities or Native communities. If you look at the poverty rate and the programs and the assistance that's devoted towards Native population, Hispanic population, or African American population, it's not enough. It's dismal, especially in Native communities. And so a lot of the diseases we see today can be prevented if we just cared more about Native communities. We're all social studies majors, we're all historians here. So let's think about the history that we have learned in our K-12 and college experience as it relates to Native American culture, Native American history and culture. And I did an article, I'll maybe go to it and show you, on the number of missing Native women, the pandemic of Native American women missing, because when they are not valued as human, men feel that they can just sexually assault them and do what they're disposable. And so racism impacts how diseases affects Natives even today. Furthermore, it affects how we deal with COVID in Native communities. And so that's one of the reasons, that's a different body of research that I wrote about, but it's tied into this. Now we're going to get into just some resources and lesson plans that can help teachers and students learn more about the history of Native American communities and pandemics as well. So let me get into some of my resources here. We want to switch screens. And then I'll save time for thoughts, comments, questions here momentarily. Okay, so a lot of the information I shared is going to come from these articles, some of the articles that I'm going to show you. Okay, so this is the Democracy in Me page that's on Cincinnati Public Radio. And what they are, just short articles. Sometimes it's just primarily resources. So for example, I'll just familiarize you with the website, because I think it's helpful. And also send me your email addresses and we can put you on. There is a monthly sort of newsletter. We won't harass you, but we also have a podcast that student ran, Democracy in Me podcast, that deals with a lot of these topics around civics and voting and history that I think you may be interested in as educators. So this is one of the most recent ones we did. And this is all about celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. And this article basically is telling Americans that Natives don't really feel comfortable celebrating Columbus Day because of the history behind it. And really the way we've been taught about Columbus, we all know this, has been misinformation. It needs to be a more full story. So from a Native perspective, they don't have a lot of good things to say about Columbus. And so that's where this movement of Indigenous Day came about. What is Indigenous Day? Indigenous Peoples Day began in 1989 as a holiday to counter or protest Columbus Day. It is celebrated in the US on the second Monday in October. The idea is that Columbus should not be celebrated, but exposed for his atrocities against Indigenous people. Today, the holiday honors and pays tribute to the history and culture of Indigenous people in North and South America who were settled in the Americas long before European settlers. The premise of the holiday is to reject the celebration of Columbus and the holiday as it is indicative of the violent history of colonization in the Western Hemisphere. And so these are some of the resources that I mentioned earlier. I have to go back and check some of these links because links are always changing, but this is an example, Reconsider Columbus Day. So this is, have you guys heard of the Teaching Tolerance website? It's a really cool website. And wow, this stuff is so amazing. This is from that website. There's a lesson plan here. And it deals with this idea of Indigenous people for the children. And there's some resources here
Just a quick note, guys, I linked this website into the chat so you guys can look around, and Dr. Childs is right. There's lots of resources around this topic on this website.
Yeah, thank you. And so, for example, they say you can conduct a mock trial of Columbus. You are there. The mock trial of Christopher Columbus is accessible through the education, through ERIC database. For the younger grades, there's a book, A Coyote Columbus Story. It's recommended by critics and introduces younger readers to the role Columbus played in indigenous enslavement. And so there's some resources there. So here's a Indigenous Peoples Day curriculum night. This is just a resource here. I thought this was pretty cool. So you can check that out. There's a teach-in that went on, Indigenous Days People's Curriculum Teach-in. This is from Teaching for Change, Building Social Justice, starting in the classroom. I don't know if anybody have seen this resource. But it just talks about that, and all education happens on Indigenous lands. So it's a very inspiring, building critical literacy in your classroom, American Indian children's literature. So there's some, also encourage people to look at various kinds of literature. Look, there's some literature out there that privileges Native Americans and people of color. So I always advocate that in my classroom as well. So that's this particular website. Let me go to another just to kind of show you.
Dr. Childs, I don't mean to
Yes.
divert you from your plan, but if we have time, would you be able to show us where some of the pieces on NPR might be found?
Yes, that's what this is. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good.
Clear. Democracy in Me is a subdivision of NPR. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So
Okay,
thank you for
gotcha.
the clarification.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that was my fault. Apparently I wouldn't clarify that. Yeah, Democracy in Me is a project that's on Cincinnati Public Radio. So all of these resources are from that. Does that make sense, everybody? I hope, yeah. So this is the information that I talked about today comes primarily from this article here. And there's various lesson plans. I think I have some of them already open. Smallpox in the Native American populations. So this offers some information, a narrative, but also there's a quiz here that you can use for students just to test them. This is a course here, earning credit, so you can actually take a course here. But this is on the website here. I clicked on this here, just so you know. Learning from history, pandemics are nothing new in Native communities. There's just a lot of references here that you might find useful that I used in the article. 2 Pueblos have some of the highest infection rates in the US. And we just don't hear a lot about that. And here's another article on combating discrimination against First Nations with education. Here's some lesson plans. Also, that's helpful. This is from K through 5. Oops. See, I knew that. I got to check my links. This is a research project, A Life as a Native American. Students research Native American tribes from different regions, then create an informational poster about their way of life. Some of the materials that they talk about, nonfiction books about various North American Indian tribes, internet access for further research. Day one, ask the class what they know about historical Native Americans. Who were they? Where did they live? What were their lives like? Record the students' ideas using the main idea web on the whiteboard or chart paper. Tell students that Native Americans are the people who lived in America before people from other countries came. So this is a great resource here. This is an example of something you might find on the website. This is another cool resource I found, Native American technology and art and poetry stories. And so this deals with folklore and storytelling. I'm really into this stuff. This is a grandfather story here. Rite of passage. So this is a cool little resource I found as well. The Ghost Woman and Heavy Collar of the Bloods. Different stories so what I would do with these, what I've done is have students read the narratives and respond to them and pull out themes from the story to help them understand Native American culture better. Another good one, my Cherokee Rosetta Stone. So let me just show you a couple of more resources, then I'll take some questions. I'll give you kind of an overall. If you go to Democracy, David Child's Democracy and Me, again, this is the NPR website, Cincinnati Public Radio. Just to give you an idea, there are some, I think, good social studies material that you might find useful in general about how does populism relate to current US politics. I did a piece on Black Women's Lives Matter surrounding Breonna Taylor. A lot of the things I try to tie into current events. I'm preparing a piece now on Supreme Court justices and that whole process that's going on now and the nomination process. There are some assessments, questions, a couple lesson plans. Nevertheless, they persisted Black women in the fire within lesson plan. Thought you might find that useful. Women's suffrage. Empowering girls. Can elementary educators address diversity, equity issues? That's one you might find useful. And for the most part, with all the articles, they're short, and also I try to provide resources like there are videos here that you can use, cartoons. Let me show you one more thing that I think may be helpful. One or two more things, I should say. There's a piece on podcasting in your classroom. I did sort of an autobiographical piece, a short piece, Driving While Black. I did a series of those, just experiences being an African-American, and tied it into the classroom. Lesson plan on history of creating racially segregated communities. There's probably about 100 articles here. I've been doing this for a couple of years. But they're designed to be short for teachers and not super long, probably take 5-10 minutes at the most. This is what I was looking for. So one of the things I've been trying to do is really get teachers thinking about multicultural literature. And I did this doing it when we were all quarantined. List of multicultural books. There's six this one talks about 6 great Native American books here that I really like. Nothing Like I Imagined. Oops, sorry about that. Mongrels. If I ever get out of here, After the Fall, Crazy Horse's Girlfriend by Erica Worth. So Feral Nights by Cynthia Smith, Light Kit Smith. So just wanted to show you that. And then let me do this. Hopefully this works. One of the things that I always like to say, and I'll end with this, see who has questions. A lot of times when we deal with Native American history and culture, as Americans, we relegate it to the past. We think all the Native Americans existed in the past. We don't understand that there's a contemporary lived experience of Native Americans. So this is one of the videos I included on the website. I'm going to try to play it. Let me know if you can hear the volume. I know Zoom also, you have to do certain things to do volume on Zoom. Can you hear it?
And Dr. Childs, there are some comments in the chat. The American Indian Library Association is a good resource. And then Dr. Sharp asked about works from Richard Wright, like Black Boy and Native Son.
Yes, yes. Let me say that. Thank you for keeping me to task. There's one, I'm going to mention this video, Black Seminoles, and also American Red and Black Stories of Afro-Native Identity. There's a whole history of interrelations between African Americans and Native communities. So I just wanted to mention that. In fact, there's a book I have called Black Indian Narratives, and there were Black chiefs. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is just reclaim some of this history. So I'll stop there and we can have a discussion. Again, I was saying when I first started, this is my first sort of Zoom conference. I've been teaching on Zoom, for a year and a half and doing other things, but just trying to figure things out. So, all right. Any questions or thoughts that you guys want to raise? Okay, what I'll do is mention Richard Wright. Somebody made Dr. Sharp mentioned Richard Wright, Black Boy and Native Son. Those are two of my favorite texts. I've used them in the classroom. Narrative is really good. Black Boy in particular is really good because it's narrative. It's sort of autobiographically written from Richard Wright's perspective. And it reminds me of a piece I mentioned. Looks like we have a little bit of time. I'll bring it up again. I've done a couple of autobiographical pieces that I think may be useful for teachers. That's reminiscent of sort of in that same spirit of Richard Wright. Here it is. I'll pull it up. This is Driving While Black, Musings on White Privilege. So I start saying a tale of two Black men. As I entered into the used car dealership, I was already experiencing fatigue, having gone into several other establishments in search of the perfect car for the perfect price. But basically, it's my story of going to buy a used car and being pulled over by the police, and the police officer accused me of being a drug dealer, and amongst other experiences I've had. So I've written about some of that because what I want to do is try to give that empathy for those that may have not had that experience, and those that may think folks of color are just trying to play the victim. It's a 3-part series that I put on the blog there. So I thought that was worth mentioning. Let's see. Last week, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say those resources are really timely. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm in Louisville, and that's something a lot of our teachers are talking about right now. I did want to bring up a question in the chat, Dr. Childs, from Jeremy. Can you recommend any primary sources from a Native American perspective which reveal the impact of the European diseases upon Native Americans?
Yes. Send me an email. I'll send you something from off the site that, in the interest of time, I'll send you things that I've used from that perspective. Yeah, I'll just send it to you. I'll send you some resources. Let's do that I've used in the classroom. Thank you for that question. And anybody else that wants those resources, I'll send those to you as well. Were there any other questions before I give some concluding remarks or respond to some things in the chat?
I don't have any in the chat, but I do have a comment from
Okay.
Tessa, just showing appreciation, mentioning the fact that American Indians are often kept in the past, but they are a contemporary people as well. And then Dr. Sharp asked if your PowerPoint will be in the KCSS folder. If you can either send me that PowerPoint or just link it in the chat, I can put it in the folder for you, and that way it'll be made available to all of our participants.
I'll probably send it because it's not a link right now. I guess I could make it a link.
It doesn't have to be. If sending it is easier, that's totally fine too.
I'll send it to you. Thank you, Dr. Sharp. Other thoughts, comments? Teresa said last week, Kentucky governor just signed a proclamation for IPD in Kentucky. Thank you for that information. The American Indian Library Association is a good resource. Somebody said that earlier. And so I want to, in conclusion, I've been thinking about this for a while. The pandemic causes us, the pandemic has really brought about a lot of disparities, in the United States to light. And I remember hearing conversations about how it affected the African-American community and, what are we going to do about it? But also the same thing with Native communities, and it's a resource issue. It's a resource issue. Who do we value in our society? I think that's a really important conversation. What groups do we value? What groups don't we value? We can give it lip service, but these things are really important in terms of equity, because the difference between equality and equity is when you treat everyone the same. That sounds good on the surface, but equity is all about sort of leveling the playing field. Some folks may need more resources than others, and we have to be okay with that equity piece. And so as I said, I think I got time to show you one more resource here, and then we'll close out. Well, this one in particular, I'll just show you this here. Another aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is Native American population in South America. And I thought this was interesting because it deals with one of the isolated groups in the Amazon rainforest. And just trying to give those folks resources and the sort of forgotten people. I think Native American people in general is major tragedies of the United States, of the history of the world. And just trying to reclaim that history. There are lost languages, there are lost customs, there are lost cultures. And I think as social studies teachers, I always want to give us a charge as historians, bring these resources into the classroom. Please bring these resources to the classroom. Start talking to your students early. I work with social studies folks on the elementary, middle grades, and secondary level, 3 different classes. And I don't think it's ever too early to start having these kinds of conversations. And I kind of blew past this one resource that I think is worth mentioning. Can elementary educators address diversity and equity issues? One of the ways I've brought in conversations about racism into with the very, very young is through bullying curriculum, and trying to help them understand that treating people differently because they're Black, brown, or what have you, it's wrong, and we should treat people how we want to be treated. But PBS has a great resource. I don't know if it's any elementary folks that are going to elementary, but even middle grades, these can be used. They have some great conversations. Arthur deals with racism. I won't play it, I'll just show it to you. So I thought this was cool too. So there's a lot of good things going on out there, a lot of efforts being made to try to provide resources for us as teachers. Some things on forgiveness, teaching 6-year-olds about privilege and power, Black Lives Matter, Brain Pop. This is really cool. So a lot of people are really trying to give us some good resources as well. But in closing, I just want to say it's an untapped service. It's really untapped resources. There's so much work we have to do. Just tying it back to the whole Native American piece, there's so much work that we have to do in terms of leveling the playing field. I think the reason why the racial tension is going on, one main reason why we're in such a bad situation as it relates to racial relations, politics, we're divided down the middle. A lot of the politics have to do with race. A lot of the reason we're divided is because people are not comfortable with folks different from themselves. And I think one of the biggest reasons that has been the case is because the way we have taught social studies in our classrooms, the way we have whitewashed social studies, for lack of a better word. Social studies has been taught from a European perspective. And K-12, I mean, I didn't really get any serious conversation about race relations as it relates to history until really some undergrad, but really serious in graduate school. And so as history teachers, we have done a disservice with the curriculum. And so really we can do the work in our classroom. So that's all I have to say. Any other thoughts or questions before I close out? Okay.
I'd like to thank you for being here with us, Dr. Childs, and participants. Thank you guys for being here as well. We have our lunch block coming up from noon until 1:10, and then we're starting our second round, but it'll be our 4th session at 1:20. I also want to let you guys know that we have a Zoom room that'll be open that's linked into the program agenda during lunch from 12:40 to 1:10, just for networking. Vendors will be there if there's people from across the state that you wanted to catch up with or ask questions of, or talk about some of the content and the learning shared today. That Zoom room will be open from 12:40 to 1:10. And again, that's linked in the program agenda. After the 4th session, we have our keynote address from Gwen Henderson, and then we'll have our closing session. So again, I'd like to thank you guys for attending. Thank you, Dr. Childs, for presenting a session that was so closely aligned to our theme this year and being at the conference. It's our first time too, so we're figuring out virtual conference world and all of that stuff. But thank you guys, and we will see you after lunch at session 4 at 1:20.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good day. Thanks. Talk to you soon, Dr. Sharp. I owe you I think I owe you guys revisions for the journal. I think I owe you a revision for the journal.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
So you had the manuscript accepted. Okay, and you're working on the revisions right now.
Major revisions. Major.
Oh, you know what? Mine had to go through major revisions too in the spring. Hey, it makes us better.
Right.
It makes our scholarship better.
Yeah, have a good day. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Take care.
All right.